Hello everyone. Before we start, hit that like button and subscribe. Drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is for you. That's how YouTube keeps sending you stories like this. And now, let's get into it. It was late October, a few nights before Halloween, when I decided to take a long drive after work. I'd been feeling restless for days, like something was crawling under my skin that I couldn't shake. The kind of mood where you just want to get in the car, turn off your phone, and keep driving until your mind settles. I left the city around 8 p.m., planning to take the back roads that cut through old farmland before looping back around toward home. I told myself it was just to clear my head, but I think deep down I wanted something to happen. Some break from the monotony I'd been drowning in for weeks. The air was cold that night, the kind of chill that stings your fingers even when the heater's on. The sky was completely black except for a sliver of moon that didn't offer much light. The road wound between long stretches of fields, some empty, others lined with trees that seemed to swallow the dark. I barely saw another car the entire drive. After about 40 minutes, I came across a small dirt road that branched off to the left. I'd never noticed it before. There wasn't a sign, not even a mailbox, just two thin ruts in the dirt leading into a wall of trees. I don't know why, but I slowed down and stopped there. Maybe curiosity, maybe boredom. The road didn't look used much. Grass growing down the middle, and branches hung low over it, almost touching the ground. I hesitated looking down the path. Then, against my better judgment, I turned my wheel and drove in. My headlights washed over the trees and the uneven ground. The sound of gravel crunching under the tires was loud in the quiet. The further I went, the narrower it got. I could tell no one had driven through in a long time. My car brushed against overgrown branches, scraping the sides, and I winced at the sound. I thought about backing out, but there wasn't much room to turn around, so I kept going, telling myself I'd find a place up ahead to loop back. About half a mile in, the road opened up into a small clearing. There was an old farmhouse there, completely dark, the kind that looked forgotten. The siding was gray and peeling, and the roof sagged slightly. A rusted tractor sat off to the side, surrounded by tall weeds. It looked like it hadn't moved in decades. The place felt wrong, though I couldn't say why. Maybe it was how quiet it was. No crickets, no wind, nothing. Just silence pressing against the car windows. I parked for a moment, headlights lighting up the front of the house. I just stared at it. My gut told me to leave, but my mind kept saying there might be an old sign. Something interesting, maybe some bit of local history. I shut off the engine but left the headlights on, stepped out, and immediately felt the cold air slice through me. The smell of damp earth hit me, strong like rotting leaves and wet wood. The house had a front porch that sagged so low I thought it might collapse if I stepped on it. The door was slightly open, swinging a little in the breeze that had suddenly started up. I stood there for a long time listening, but there wasn't any sound inside. I told myself I'd just take a quick look and leave. When I pushed the door, it creaked so loud it made my stomach tighten. Inside, the air was thick with dust and that musty, closed-up smell. My flashlight beam cut through the dark and showed a room full of broken furniture, a couch covered with a dirty sheet, and a few picture frames still hanging crooked on the walls. One had fallen and shattered on the floor. The wallpaper was peeling in long strips. I could see old footprints in the dust, though I couldn't tell if they were mine or someone else's. The house had that heavy feeling to it, like the air itself was dense. I walked slowly, my footsteps muffled. I tried to tell myself it was abandoned years ago, nothing more. Still, every time the floor creaked, I froze. I checked the kitchen, cabinets hanging open, rusted pots still on the counter. It looked like whoever lived there just left one day and never came back. Then I noticed something strange. Near the back of the room, there was a door that looked newer than the rest of the house. The paint was fresher, and there was a padlock hanging from it, unlocked but still attached. It didn't fit the rest of the place. I stood there for a while staring at it, trying to decide if I really wanted to see what was behind it. I unhooked the lock and pushed the door open. The hinges squealed, echoing down what turned out to be a narrow stairway. It led into complete darkness. The smell that came from it was strong, something between dirt and mold, but sharper, almost chemical. I aimed my flashlight down but couldn't see much beyond the first few steps. Part of me wanted to stop there, to turn around and walk straight out, but something about it pulled me in. Maybe it was just that urge to know, to see something forbidden. I stepped down slowly, the old wood groaning under my weight. My light bounced off rough concrete walls and exposed pipes. When I reached the bottom, I realized it wasn't a basement like I expected. It was more like a workshop. There was a table against one wall, and on it were tools, rusted pliers, a hammer, a saw. But there were also things that didn't make sense. Glass jars, dozens of them lined up neatly. Some empty, others filled with what looked like murky liquid. I stepped closer and my heart started pounding harder. Floating inside a few of them were small bones. Maybe animal bones, maybe not. It was hard to tell. There were metal hooks hanging from the ceiling too, the kind you'd see in a butcher shop. Most were empty, but a few had dark stains underneath on the floor. I felt sick. I told myself they were old stains, maybe paint, maybe rust, but the air smelled faintly metallic. My flashlight trembled in my hand. I heard something above me, a soft sound like wood shifting, then a faint thump. I froze completely, holding my breath. It wasn't wind. It was something moving. I turned off my light and listened. My heartbeat was so loud I could barely hear over it. But then it came again. Slow, deliberate footsteps crossing the floor upstairs. Someone was in the house. I stayed there in the dark for what felt like forever, barely breathing. Every few seconds, another step. Not hurried, just steady. Whoever it was knew someone was there. I could feel it. My mind raced. Had they seen my car outside? Had they been watching from the woods when I pulled in? The footsteps stopped right above me, over the same spot where the stairs began. I didn't dare move. My legs were trembling so bad I thought the noise might give me away. Then, after maybe a minute of dead silence, the stairs creaked. One step, then another. Someone was coming down. I backed up slowly, keeping the light off, trying to find somewhere to hide. My hand brushed against something hanging from the wall, a coat stiff with dust. I moved behind a support beam and crouched low. The steps came closer, slow and uneven, like the person was careful not to make noise but couldn't help the floors groaning. I could see their shadow now, long and distorted from the faint bit of moonlight leaking down the stairway. I didn't wait to see more. I turned and ran toward the far side of the basement, where there was a small window near the ceiling, half covered with dirt and cobwebs. I climbed onto a crate and started pushing on it with all my strength. It didn't move at first, but the sound of footsteps coming closer pushed me harder. It gave way with a snap, glass cracking loud enough to echo through the room. I didn't care anymore. I dragged myself through the opening, cutting my arm on the edge, and fell into the cold grass outside. I heard something heavy drop behind me, like someone stepping hard at the bottom of the stairs. I didn't look back. I just ran, through the trees, tripping over roots, branches whipping my face. I ran until my chest felt like it was going to burst. When I finally reached the car, I could barely get the keys into the ignition because my hands were shaking so badly. I started it, slammed it into reverse, and tore down that dirt path so fast the car nearly fishtailed. I didn't look back once. When I got home, I sat in my driveway for a long time, just breathing, trying to understand what had happened. My arm was bleeding where the glass cut me. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't call the police. I just cleaned the cut, showered, and tried to sleep, but I couldn't. I kept thinking about those jars, those stains, the footsteps. A few days later, I tried to find the road again. I drove that whole stretch of highway twice, both directions, but it wasn't there. Just miles of trees and empty fields. No turnoff, no ruts, no sign of anything. I know where it should have been. I remember exactly where I turned, but it was gone. I still drive that route sometimes, even now, hoping I'll see it again. Part of me wants proof it was real, but another part of me knows I don't ever want to find that house again, because if it's still there, then so is whoever or whatever was waiting at the bottom of those stairs. This happened about 12 years ago, when I was still in high school and living at home. My parents had just bought a condo from a family friend. It wasn't new or fancy, just one of those older, quiet complexes with cream-colored walls and low ceilings that always smelled a bit like carpet cleaner and someone else's cooking. The condo had belonged to an older woman, the mother of my dad's friend. She had passed away there, apparently of natural causes. Nothing suspicious or tragic, just old age. My parents knew about it before buying, but it didn't bother them. My mom said the woman had been kind, generous, and a little eccentric. She apparently had a fascination with witchcraft or black magic. Not in a sinister way, more like a hobby. She had books and trinkets, candles and herbs, things like that. My parents didn't think much of it. They figured she was just into spiritual stuff. When we moved in, a lot of her belongings were still there. The family hadn't cleared everything out, and my parents, being practical, kept what was useful. We had her living room set, coffee tables, a few dressers, and even some of her old knickknacks. I remember my mom carefully dusting off a few porcelain figurines that sat on the shelves, saying, "Well, these are too nice to throw away." I never really thought about it. The place had that old person feel for a while. Stale perfume, old wood, the faint smell of something like lavender mixed with dust. It took a few months before it started to feel like ours. The condo was small. My room was down the hall across from my parents' bedroom, and there was one bathroom we all shared. The living room opened into the kitchen with this narrow counter in between, and there was always this draft coming from somewhere near the sliding glass door that led to the balcony. You could hear every sound in that place, footsteps, creaks, the hum of the fridge. But it was never spooky, at least not at first. It was just old. A few months after we moved in, small things started happening. Not strange in the way you'd expect. No flickering lights, no eerie noises in the night. Just twisty ties, the kind that come with bread bags or produce. The first one I noticed was on the coffee table. I had been watching TV, went into the kitchen to grab a drink, and when I came back, there was this little green twisty tie sitting right where the remote had been. I thought maybe my mom had dropped it, or my dad had been tidying up. Didn't think much of it, but then it happened again. A few days later, I found a red one on the kitchen counter, coiled neatly like someone had placed it there on purpose. Another time, one showed up wrapped around the cord of the lamp in my room. I remember staring at it thinking, why would someone do that? We didn't even use twisty ties much. We kept our bread in plastic clips. It made no sense. Soon it became a running thing in the house. My mom found one in the bathroom drawer, tied perfectly around a comb. My dad found one tucked in the silverware tray. I found one wrapped loosely around my toothbrush one morning. That one made me pause. Remember standing there, half asleep, staring at this tiny piece of wire and paper, thinking, what the hell? It wasn't scary, not exactly, but it was weird. We all accused each other of messing around. My dad thought it was my mom trying to spook me. My mom thought I was doing it as a prank, but none of us ever admitted to anything. After a while, it stopped feeling like a prank and more like something that just happened, part of the house. It wasn't daily, but every week or so, one would show up somewhere new. Always visible, always placed somewhere it couldn't be missed. I started to expect them in a strange way. If a few days went by without one, I'd catch myself glancing around, half looking for one to appear. Sounds ridiculous, but it became almost normal. I started collecting them. I'd take each new one I found and put it in my nightstand drawer. It became a little habit. Some were different colors, red, green, gold, even one that was white and almost looked new. Each one had its own shape. Some were bent into loops or figure eights, others coiled tight like springs. None of them looked exactly the same. By the end of the first year living there, I had a small pile of them tucked in the drawer beside my bed. I used to tell myself I'd eventually find out who was doing it. But deep down, I don't think any of us really wanted to ruin the mystery. There were no other strange things that happened. No moving furniture, no whispers in the night, nothing like that. Just twisty ties. Sometimes I'd find one in a place that didn't even make sense, like under the TV remote, or stuck to the edge of the couch cushion. Once I was doing homework and found one slipped between the pages of my notebook. It had a faint smell to it, like metal mixed with something old, maybe perfume. Years passed like that. Finished high school, went to college, and moved out. My parents sold the condo a few years later and moved into a house. The day we packed up, I found one last twisty tie on the windowsill of my room. It was gold and twisted into a small, perfect loop. I remember picking it up, turning it between my fingers and feeling this strange sense of quiet. Like whoever or whatever had been leaving them knew we were leaving. I added it to my collection and kept them all in a small box when I moved. A few years after that, I learned something from the family friend who had sold us the condo. We were at some gathering, and she brought up her mother, the woman who had owned the place. I told her about the twisty ties kind of jokingly, expecting her to laugh it off. Instead, she smiled, not surprised at all, and said, "That's funny. My mom used to save all her twisty ties. She said they were useful, and that nothing should ever go to waste. We'd always joke about it. She had jars full of them. It became this silly inside thing between us. I remember just sitting there letting that sink in. It wasn't creepy, just oddly touching. It made sense in this strange personal way. All those twisty ties showing up after she was gone. It wasn't like she was haunting the place, but maybe there was something of her left behind. Not in a ghostly sense, but in the little habits that linger after people die. The small things they touch, the routines that somehow stick around even when they don't. Eventually, that condo complex got hit by a flood. The whole lower level was destroyed, including our old unit. I saw pictures online years later. Water up to the windows, debris everywhere. It was strange seeing a place that once felt like home turned into a ruin. I wondered what happened to the furniture we left behind. The things that belonged to that woman before us. Maybe it all got swept away, maybe not. I still have that little box of twisty ties. It sits in the back of my closet now, mixed in with other old keepsakes from that time in my life. Every now and then, I'll open it and look at them. The color's still bright, the shape's still the same. It doesn't scare me or anything. It just feels familiar, like a reminder that houses hold more than just people. They hold habits, memories, little fragments of who lived there before. And sometimes when I'm at the grocery store and pick up a loaf of bread, I notice the twisty tie on it. I'll take it off, straighten it out, and for a second I think about that condo. The stale smell of the old carpet, the creak of the balcony door, and how those small, harmless pieces of wire seem to follow us for years. I think about that woman, the one I never met but somehow knew in this quiet, indirect way. It never felt like something supernatural. It was more like a trace, a pattern left behind by someone who found comfort in small things. There's something human about that, something simple. Even now, whenever I see a twisty tie lying around, on a counter, on the floor, wherever, I can't help but stop and smile. It's strange how something so ordinary can hold so much memory. It's not fear that I feel anymore, just this quiet connection to a moment, a place and a person who once existed, whose small habits somehow crossed into my life and stayed there. I live in a small cul-de-sac in the middle of nowhere. It's one of those places where you can stand outside at night and not see a single light beyond your own. The next nearest neighborhood is about 4 miles away, maybe a little more if you count the winding roads and open fields between us. It's quiet, and that's what I used to love about it. You get used to the silence after a while. The only sounds are the wind through the trees, and sometimes a snowplow in the distance during winter. This happened a few years ago, during one of those heavy snowfalls that shut everything down. It started late in the evening on a Friday night. By morning, there was over 1.5 feet of snow blanketing everything. The trees sagged under the weight, and the roads were invisible, just a smooth, untouched sheet of white. Living this far out, I knew no one was coming to plow for a while. It was the weekend, and the local plow service prioritized main roads first. We were always last. That morning, I woke up early and went to the kitchen. The light from outside was that soft gray blue you only see during heavy snow. I made coffee and stood by the sliding glass door that led to my back deck. The snow was still falling hard, thick flakes drifting slowly. No sound except for the soft hum of the heater inside. It was peaceful. I opened the curtains all the way to look at the snow-covered trees, thinking I'd take a few pictures before it got too bright. That's when I saw them. Footprints. They started at the edge of my deck just by the railing and led straight up to the glass door where I was standing. Then they turned around and went back the same way. The prints were deep, clear in the fresh snow. They weren't old. They hadn't filled in yet with falling flakes. My stomach turned a little when I realized that someone had walked right up to my door sometime during the night. At first, I tried to brush it off. My neighbors have a few teenage kids. Bored, a little reckless sometimes. Maybe they thought it would be funny to sneak around in the snow, ring some bells, play pranks. It wouldn't be the first time something like that happened. What made it worse was that one of my sledding tubes that I kept on the deck railing was popped. It had a clean tear down the side, the kind that doesn't just happen from pressure or cold. Someone had jabbed or cut it. I figured I'd call their parents later in the day. It was still early, and I didn't want to start anything before everyone was awake. So I went back inside, warmed up, and sat down with my phone. After scrolling through Facebook for a while, I saw a post from one of my neighbors, the woman who lived 2 houses down near the entrance of the cul-de-sac. Her post said, "Did someone knock at my back door last night?" The words made the hair on my neck stand up. I immediately called her. We talked briefly, both realizing that something weird was going on. I told her about the footprints I'd seen, and that I thought one of the kids might have been messing around. She said her kids were gone for the weekend and she hadn't seen any of the neighbors' kids out either. That made me uneasy. I decided to call the guy who lived at the first house near the entrance. He said he'd check his yard and call me back. A few minutes later he did, and his voice sounded off. He said there were footprints at his door too. They led up to his back porch, stopped at his door, and then went back the same direction they came from. At that point, we all started calling each other. Everyone in the cul-de-sac began checking. Most of the houses had the same thing, prints up to the door, then away again. But when we got to the end of the street, things changed. The woman who lived at the very end said she didn't see any footprints around her place. That gave everyone a little relief for a moment. But then my next-door neighbor called me. She had just spoken to the woman who lived next to the end house. That woman said there were footprints leading right up to her back door, but none leading away. That stopped everything. We all froze. Everyone on the phone line went silent for a few seconds. Then it all started at once. People shouting saying we should call the police. Someone already had. But the dispatcher said that because the roads were unplowed, they couldn't send a car out right away. They said they'd try once conditions improved. Now it wasn't just strange, it was scary. That woman at the end of the street was panicking. One of the husbands across the road from her, a big guy everyone knew, texted her and said he was coming over to bring her back to his place. We all watched from our windows as he trudged through the snow toward her house. The snow was so deep it came up almost to his knees, and the wind had started to pick up again. He got her out safely, and they went back to his house. After that, we all started taking extra precautions. One of the guys in our group had motion-activated hunting cameras, the kind that send live feeds to your phone. We set them up to face the driveways and main exits of the neighborhood. For hours, nothing happened. The day dragged on. The snow finally stopped falling in the afternoon, but the air was still thick with that heavy quiet after a storm. Nobody left their houses. We were all glued to our phones, watching those live feeds. Then around 7 p.m., we heard the rumble of an engine. A plow truck finally came through, followed by 3 police cars. The officers spoke with a few of us outside, and then went straight to the house where the footprints had led in, but not out. The woman who lived there had gone back to the house with the couple she was staying with. She didn't want to go inside alone, so they stood with her in the doorway as the police went in. They searched the house once and came back empty-handed. Nothing in the main rooms, nothing upstairs, nothing in the basement. But she begged them to check again. She was terrified. So 2 of the officers went back down into the basement for a second look, After a while, only one of them came back up. He looked pale, serious. He took the woman aside into another room, and though the rest of us were still outside, we could hear muffled crying from inside. Some of us started to approach the door to see what was happening, but the other officers stepped in front of us and told us to stay back. A few minutes later, the basement door opened again. The officer who had stayed down there came up behind a scruffy-looking man, dragging him by the arm. The man was shouting, kicking, trying to twist away, but they got him into cuffs and let him out. He looked filthy, muddy clothes, a torn jacket, beard all overgrown. The cops put him in one of the cars and drove him away. Then they went back inside to collect some things. They brought out a few blankets, a backpack, and some other small stuff. Later, we learned that he had been hiding under a covered space in the stairwell of the basement, an opening the homeowner didn't even know existed. It was behind some boxes covered with an old sheet. Inside that little crawl space, he'd made himself a small camp. Blankets, empty food wrappers, even a flashlight. Some of the blankets were ones she had recently washed and stored. The police told us later that he was a drifter from a nearby county, a man with a history of violence and drug use. He had been on probation for assaulting a family member. They believed he got into a fight with his roommate and drove off in his roommate's car. When the snowstorm hit, he must have gotten stuck somewhere near our area and started wandering on foot looking for shelter. He had gone house to house checking for unlocked doors. When he found hers, he got in through the basement, probably sometime during the night when everyone was asleep. That woman didn't stay there after that night. She lived with friends in the neighborhood for months. Even after everything was cleared up, she couldn't sleep in that house again. She ended up selling it the next summer. For a long time after, we all started locking every door, even during the day. I added motion lights to every corner of my house and checked my windows twice before bed. The quiet that I used to love about living out here doesn't feel the same anymore. That night taught me something I'll never forget. When you live far away from everything and everyone, sometimes the silence hides things you never expect. And no matter how safe you think you are, always, always make sure your doors are locked. Last year, my parents went on holiday for 2 weeks and asked me to stay at their house to look after their 2 dogs, Milo and Daisy. I didn't really want to, because they live way out in the countryside, in this small converted barn surrounded by fields and thick hedgerows. It's beautiful in the daytime, but once the sun goes down, the whole place changes. It gets so quiet that every sound stands out. You can hear the wind slide across the roof tiles, or a fox cry from miles away. Even the pipes in the house seem to creak louder. I've never liked being there alone at night, but I agreed because they needed someone they trusted with the dogs. They're both older retrievers, calm and friendly, and the place is comfortable enough. My parents left on a Thursday morning, and the first few nights were fine. I worked remotely during the day, took the dogs for walks along the country lanes, made simple dinners, and tried to keep myself busy. The only issue was the silence at night. Once it got dark, I could hear every shift in the house, the ticking of the old clock in the hallway, the faint hum of the refrigerator, and sometimes the wind pushing against the windows. By around day 10, I had settled into a sort of rhythm. It was early autumn and the days were getting shorter. That night, I went to bed a little after midnight. The house was completely still except for the dogs sleeping near the foot of my bed. I left a small lamp on in the hallway because I hated how dark it got otherwise. I remember lying there for a while, listening to the occasional rustle of the dogs moving, before I finally drifted off. At some point later, I woke up. The digital clock on the bedside table said 4:03 a.m. At first, I didn't know what had woken me. Then I heard it, some kind of faint, muffled noise coming from downstairs. It was rhythmic, almost like voices, but distorted. For a second, I thought I must have fallen asleep with the TV on, though I was sure I hadn't watched anything before bed. The dogs were awake too. Both had lifted their heads and were staring toward the door. I sat up slowly, listening. The sound was definitely coming from downstairs. It was strange. It wasn't loud, but steady enough to be clear through the wooden floorboards. A man's voice, droning, like he was giving a lecture or commentary. The dog started shifting around, uneasy. I got up, grabbed the flashlight from the nightstand, and crept out into the hallway. The house was cold. The light from the hall lamp made the wooden beams look darker, heavier. I could hear the faint echo of that voice better now, along with the distinct clicking sound of a computer mouse being used. I stopped halfway down the stairs, my heart starting to pound because I realized what was off. No one should be in the house. I went all the way down, barefoot, careful not to make noise. From the bottom of the stairs, I could see that the lounge was completely dark. The TV was off, no light coming from it, no glow from any electronics there. But the sound wasn't coming from that direction. It was coming from the office at the far end of the hallway. As I got closer, I noticed both dogs were standing alert outside that office door. Milo had his ears up, tail stiff, and Daisy was making this low, nervous whine. And then I saw it. The thin line of light leaking out from the bottom of the office door. It was a pale, bluish glow, like the kind you get from a computer screen. The sound was clearer now. A man speaking in English, but with a thick accent. His voice was calm, clinical. There were short bursts of old static and occasional barking sounds. Dogs barking, sharp and panicked. I froze there for a few seconds trying to make sense of it. Then I noticed something else. The office door was slightly open. I pushed it open just enough to see inside. The room was lit only by the computer screen on my brother's desk. The glow reflected off the framed pictures on the wall, the old maps, and the glass of the bookcase. My brother's gaming chair was pulled close to the desk, but no one was sitting in it. The computer was on, fully awake. No lock screen, no password prompt. Just open on the monitor. A YouTube video was playing in full screen. The title bar at the top read something about Soviet experiments, specifically something to do with dog head transplants. The footage looked old, grainy, black and white. I could see a man in a lab coat speaking in Russian, gesturing to some kind of table where what looked like a severed dog's head was hooked up to wires and tubes. The sound was that voice, narration describing what the scientists had done. The words were monotone, clinical, like a documentary. I stood there for a full minute, staring, frozen. The dogs wouldn't come near the door. They both just stood in the hallway, watching. The weirdest part was the computer itself. It belonged to my brother, and I knew he hadn't been home in months. He was somewhere in Europe working on a sailing crew. He was protective about his computer too. It was always locked with a password. I didn't know it, my parents didn't know it. There was no way it could have just been left on. But there it was, running, playing a random old video about Soviet experiments on dogs. The room felt wrong somehow. There was a faint hum like static in the air, maybe from the computer fan or the speakers. I stepped closer, leaned over the desk to check if maybe it had turned on by accident or restarted itself. But there was no explanation that made sense. The chair was pushed neatly in, the keyboard untouched. I didn't want to touch anything, but I reached for the mouse and moved it slightly. The cursor moved. The video kept playing. It wasn't a screensaver or some automated thing. Someone had physically started it. That realization made my stomach twist. I checked the rest of the house after that. Every door was still locked. No windows open, no sign of forced entry anywhere. The alarm hadn't gone off either. I went back upstairs, shut my bedroom door, locked it, and sat on the bed with both dogs beside me. I left the light on. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. Every little sound made me jump. At some point around dawn, I finally went downstairs again and the office light was off. When I opened the door, the computer was completely shut down, cold to the touch. I didn't try to turn it back on. The next day I stayed home to work because I didn't want to leave the dogs alone. Kept telling myself it must have been some weird automatic update, or maybe I'd forgotten my brother had something running. But no matter how I tried to reason it out, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been in the house. Later that afternoon, I checked the security camera footage from the small camera my dad had installed near the back door. It records on motion detection. I scrolled through the night before, nothing. No motion between midnight and sunrise. The only motion it recorded was me, walking the dogs around 10 p.m. Still, something about it all stuck in my head. Why that video? Why was it open and unlocked? Why did it play so clearly, like someone had picked it deliberately? I started avoiding the office altogether after that. I closed the door and kept it shut for the rest of the stay. The dogs didn't like going near it anyway. They'd pause every time we passed it, sniff the air, then keep walking. When my parents came home, I didn't tell them what had happened right away. I didn't want to sound crazy, but a few days later, I mentioned it casually to my brother on a video call. He laughed at first, but then he got quiet. He said his computer shouldn't even be able to boot without his password. He used an encrypted drive. I could tell he was unnerved too, though he tried not to show it. Even now, I still can't explain that night. I've gone over every possible reason. Some kind of glitch, remote access, power surge, something like that. But none of it fits. The house is too remote to pick up anyone's Wi-Fi, and my brother's accounts all had two-step verification. For weeks afterward, I kept thinking about the video itself. The images, the sounds, the way it echoed in the dark. Every time I looked at the dogs, I'd think about what I saw on that screen. The stillness of those experiments. The quiet cruelty of it. It made me feel sick. Since then, I've never stayed at that house alone again. Whenever my parents ask me to dog sit, I make an excuse. They don't question it. I still don't know what turned that computer on, or who started that video. But sometimes when I think about that night, I remember one small thing I noticed before I left the room. The search bar on YouTube wasn't blank. Someone had typed into it. It said, "How to reattach a dog's head." I didn't tell anyone that part. When I was little, maybe 6 or 7 years old, my weekends were the highlight of my week. My parents would let me stay up late in the living room to watch TV. It felt like the best kind of freedom, the kind that made you feel older than you really were. The house would go quiet after my parents went to bed, and it was just me, the soft glow of the television, and the faint hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. Sometimes I'd stretch out on the couch with a blanket and let my eyes drift shut as the sound from the TV filled the background. That night, it was the same as usual. I remember the movie that was playing wasn't scary, but it was late enough that the commercials were all strange, local ads that played too loud for how quiet the house was. I'd already started to nod off when I heard something outside. It was faint at first, a soft squeak, then a steady rhythm. I knew that sound. It was the old porch swing. Our house had a small front porch with wooden steps, and that swing my dad had installed years before. It was one of those simple ones made from slats of wood strung on metal chains. I loved that swing during the day, but at night, when it moved on its own, it made a sound that didn't belong to anything good. At first, I thought maybe it was the wind, but the air felt still. Even the curtains hanging near the window weren't moving. The sound didn't stop either. It creaked forward and back, steady and slow. I remember the exact feeling that ran through me. It wasn't panic right away. It was more like a pressure in my chest, a kind of slow dread that made me feel small. I sat up on the couch and turned the TV volume down. The room instantly felt emptier. I listened again. The swing was still moving. The sound had a pattern, like someone was pushing off gently with their feet. I got up slowly, dragging the blanket with me, and went to the bay window. Our living room lights were dim, but the porch light outside was still on, casting a pale yellow glow over the wood and the railing. I remember pressing my forehead lightly against the cold glass and peeking through the gap between the curtains. That's when I saw her. She was sitting right there on the swing. An older woman, probably in her 50s. Her hair was long and gray, messy and tangled like she'd been outside for hours. She wore nothing but a thin nightgown that hung loose and was stained dark down the front. It took me a second to realize what it was: blood. Her arms, legs, even her bare feet were smeared with it. In her right hand, she held a kitchen knife. The blade caught the porch light every time she moved slightly. For a moment, I couldn't move. I didn't even breathe. My mind couldn't make sense of what I was seeing. I thought maybe I was dreaming. Maybe I'd fallen asleep on the couch and was imagining it. But she moved. The swing creaked again as she rocked forward slightly, her knees bending. That sound snapped me out of it. I turned and ran as fast as I could down the hallway. My feet slapped against the floor and I nearly tripped over the blanket still tangled around my legs. I burst into my parents' bedroom and tried to scream, but nothing came out at first. It was like my throat locked up. My chest hurt, and all I could do was gasp and wave my arms toward the living room. My mom sat up right away, startled, and my dad turned on the lamp, squinting in the sudden light. When I finally managed to get the words out, I was crying. I told them there was someone on the porch, a woman with a knife, covered in blood. My dad's face changed quickly from confusion to irritation. He was half asleep and clearly thought I'd had a nightmare. He told me to calm down and that it wasn't real, but I kept saying it over and over again. My mom tried to comfort me, but I couldn't stop crying. The more I tried to explain, the more frustrated my dad got. He got up, pulled on a shirt, and said he'd show me there was nothing there. He grabbed my wrist and started pulling me toward the hallway. I remember digging my heels into the carpet, begging him not to go. My voice was breaking and I was shaking so badly my teeth were chattering. He kept saying, "There's nothing out there," but I couldn't stop fighting him. He was stronger though, and he kept dragging me along. The sound of the swing was still there. I could hear it again as we reached the front door. He stopped, put his hand on the lock and turned to me. I remember him looking down with an annoyed expression, like he wanted to end this whole scene right now. He twisted the deadbolt, turned the knob, and swung the door open. "See? There's nothing—" He didn't finish the sentence. His voice just stopped. His whole body froze and his mouth stayed slightly open. I'll never forget his face. His eyes went wide and all the color drained from him. I looked past him and she was still there. The woman was sitting on the swing exactly as before, only now she had stopped rocking. She was staring right at us. Her face looked hollow, tired, like she hadn't slept in days. There were streaks of dried blood down her arms, and her feet were muddy. The knife hung loosely in her hand, glinting under the porch light. Then without any sound, she stood up. Slowly. My dad slammed the door shut so hard the frame rattled. He locked it, pulled me away from it, and yelled for my mom to call the police. I could hear her in the bedroom, her voice trembling as she tried to explain what was happening. My dad ran down the hallway and came back with his shotgun. He stood by the door, cracked it open just enough to stick the barrel through, and shouted something. I couldn't hear her answer clearly, but I could hear her voice, low, shaky, and strange. She said something about her husband, that someone had killed him, but it wasn't her. Then she started crying. Not loud, but this broken kind of sound that made the hair on my arm stand up. My dad told her the police were coming and she suddenly went quiet. Then she started walking away, still holding the knife. We stood there for a long time after that, just listening. I could hear my mom still on the phone, giving our address over and over. My dad kept the gun pointed at the door, even after she was gone. I remember how tense the house felt, like every wall was listening. When the police finally arrived, their car lights lit up the whole street in flashes of red and blue. My dad went outside to talk to them, and I stayed in the living room with my mom. I was still shaking. The officers searched around and came back later saying they'd found her a few blocks away, trying to get into another house. They said she was covered in her own blood. She'd cut herself. She wasn't attacking anyone when they found her, but she had been trying to open a neighbor's door with the knife still in her hand. They took her away in an ambulance. That night didn't end for hours. My parents tried to get me to sleep in my room, but I couldn't. I stayed curled up between them in their bed, my face buried in my mom's arm, while my dad kept getting up to check the windows. Every sound outside made me jump. The wind against the siding, the creak of the floor, even the dog barking in the distance. It all felt wrong. In the morning, I went to the living room. The sunlight made everything look normal again. The porch swing was still moving slightly, creaking as if the memory of what happened hadn't worn off. There was a faint dark stain on the wood near where she had been sitting. My dad hosed it down before breakfast, and we never talked about it much after that. A few days later, he mentioned it quietly to my uncle who lived next door. My uncle was the kind of man who didn't scare easily. He always sat out on his porch at night with a beer and his old shotgun resting against the railing. My dad told him about the woman, just in case she came that way. Later, I overheard my dad laughing about something with him on the phone. Apparently, when she walked past his house that night, he'd been waiting on his porch already. He said he pointed his shotgun at her and told her to keep walking. She did. She didn't even look at him, just kept shuffling down the street until she disappeared into the dark. After a while, the story faded from the neighborhood. People talked about it for a few weeks, but then it turned into one of those half-remembered things that only comes up when someone mentions Halloween or scary stories. But for me, it never really faded. Every time I tried to sleep in the living room after that, I couldn't do it. I'd start to close my eyes and hear the faint creak of the swing again, even when I knew it wasn't moving. Sometimes I'd peek out the window just to be sure. I never saw anyone, but I could never shake that image. The thin woman in the blood-stained nightgown, sitting in the yellow light, swaying gently back and forth, like she had all the time in the world. Years later, when I was older, I asked my mom about it again. She said they never found out the full story, but the police told her the woman had been mentally ill and off her medication. Apparently, she and her husband had fought earlier that night. She'd tried to attack him, but he got away and locked her out of the house. After that, she hurt herself. Maybe trying to scare him, maybe trying to die, no one really knew. The blood all over her had been her own. The police said she wasn't dangerous anymore once they took her in. They got her medical help and said she'd been placed somewhere to recover. That was the last my parents ever heard about it. But even knowing that didn't make it any easier to think about. When I remember it now, what still gets to me isn't the blood or the knife or even the fact that she could have come inside if the door hadn't been locked. It's the way she looked when she saw us, the emptiness in her eyes. There wasn't anger or fear there, just this hollow, distant kind of sadness that didn't belong on anyone's face. I think about how easily things could have gone differently that night. If I hadn't woken up, if my dad hadn't slammed the door fast enough, if she had tried to come inside instead of just sitting there, that porch swing stayed there for years after. My dad eventually replaced the chains, but the sound never changed. Even when it was clean and oiled, it made that same faint squeak. I could still hear it at night from my room upstairs. Sometimes it would move in the wind, back and forth, slow and soft, and I'd feel that same cold knot of fear crawl up my spine. When I got older, my parents moved out of that house. They sold it to a young couple who thought the porch and swing were charming. I never told them about what happened there. Now, every Halloween, I still think about that night. I can remember the way the porch light looked shining over the wood, the smell of my dad's aftershave as he pulled me back from the door, the sound of the swing creaking in the still night air. It's strange how something that lasted only a few minutes can stay with you for a lifetime. I never slept in that living room again after that night. Not once. When I was a senior in high school, weekends were our escape. We lived in one of those towns where everything shut down by 10, and the most exciting thing you could do was drive into the hills, find some dark pull-off, and drink cheap beer under the stars. Everyone did it. I didn't even like drinking that much, so I usually ended up as the designated driver. It gave me a sense of control, I guess. Something about being behind the wheel at night, the road lit only by the car's headlights, felt safer than being one of the people stumbling around in the dark. That night started like 100 others. It was late October, a week before Halloween. The air was cold but not freezing yet, that kind of crisp air that smells like smoke and wet leaves. I remember because when we first drove out, the windows fogged from our breath, and I had to keep wiping the inside of the windshield with my sleeve. There were 5 of us in total. Me, 2 guys I'd known since middle school, and 2 girls who hung out with us mostly because one of the guys liked one of them. Everyone was in a good mood when we left town, passing around a bottle of something cheap and laughing at nothing. The kind of easy noise that fills up the inside of a car when no one wants to think about going home. We drove up into the hills where the road turned narrow and empty. There was a pull-off next to a small park. Just a picnic table, a swing set, and a patch of dirt that led to a line of pine trees. We'd stopped there before, and it was far enough from houses that no one ever bothered us. I parked under a tree, turned off the engine, and leaned back while everyone else started drinking for real. Music played quietly from someone's phone, the headlights cutting off and leaving us in that soft orange glow from the dashboard lights. It was around midnight when things started going downhill. The two girls were the first to feel sick. They'd been laughing non-stop, then suddenly went quiet and asked me to pull over again because they were going to throw up. We were already parked, but I turned the car around so the headlights faced the trees instead of the road, just in case another car came by. They stumbled out gagging and swearing, one holding her hair while the other bent over and puked right next to the car. The smell hit almost instantly, sour and heavy in the cold air. I remember rolling down the window a little just to breathe and glancing at the clock. It was 12:41. I wanted to get everyone home before 1 because the drive back took almost half an hour. I could hear them spitting and coughing, the sound echoing faintly against the trees. That's when the headlights appeared. At first, it was just light, 2 bright beams reflecting off my rearview mirror. They came up behind us, close enough that the glare flooded the car. I squinted, shielding my eyes with my hand, thinking maybe it was the cops. That happened sometimes. Someone would report noise or a ranger would check on parked cars this late at night. I froze, waiting for whoever it was to get out, but no one did. The truck just stayed there, idling. It was a pickup, white or maybe silver. Hard to tell with the lights in my face. I could hear the engine running, a deep, steady rumble. My friends outside noticed too. One of them asked me if it was the police, and I just said I didn't know. I expected the door to open any second, for someone to walk up and shine a flashlight through the window. But nothing happened. After maybe a full minute, I turned the car back on. The girls climbed in quickly, shivering, one wiping her mouth with her sleeve. I put it in drive and started pulling away slowly. As soon as I did, the pickup's headlights brightened even more, and it began moving too. That was the first time I felt real unease. Not fear yet, but that prickling tension you get when something's not adding up. I drove back toward the main road, keeping my speed steady, checking the mirror every few seconds. The truck stayed right behind us. No flashing lights, no horn, no signal to pull over. Just following. At first I told myself it was probably nothing. Maybe some guy making sure we weren't leaving trash or something. Maybe he lived nearby. But when we hit the stop sign and I turned left, the truck turned left too. I turned again a few blocks later. Same thing. That's when my stomach started to tighten. The road curved down toward the residential area, where the houses were spread out and the streetlights were dim and far apart. I drove faster, trying to lose him without it looking obvious. My friends were starting to catch on. The car got quiet. One of the guys looked over his shoulder and muttered that the truck was still there. We passed a row of dark houses, fences, driveways, nothing moving, no one outside. I turned onto another street I knew well, one that looped around the neighborhood and came out near the highway. I figured if I could just make it there, I could head back toward town where there'd be traffic, lights, people. But every time I turned, so did he. The longer it went on, the worse it felt. The truck never tried to pass, never honked, never flashed its lights again. Just followed, always the same distance behind. Every now and then, the glare would hit the inside of the car just right and light up everyone's faces. The girls were pale and quiet, one of them holding her stomach, the other staring out the window like she was trying not to cry. I started to speed up. Not enough to draw attention if a cop did see us, but fast enough to make turns sharp. I knew those roads well, every curve and side street. I took a few sharp turns, hoping he'd miss one, but each time I checked the mirror, the headlights were there again. The sound of my own heartbeat was louder than the music still faintly playing through the speakers. At one point, one of the girls said she needed to throw up again. I didn't want to stop. I didn't want to stop for anything, but she was begging, leaning forward like she was going to be sick in the car. So I pulled into a side road that led into another small park, a playground, a set of swings, the kind of place where parents bring their kids during the day. It was empty now, of course. I pulled up near the curb and stopped. The truck pulled up right behind us again. Its headlights stayed on. I could see the silhouette of the driver this time. A man, definitely older, white hair or maybe just light catching his scalp, a beard. That's all I could make out through the mirror. He wasn't moving, just sitting there, hands on the wheel. The girls were outside again, both bent over and gagging. My two friends were whispering about calling someone, but none of us had good service out there. My phone had one bar, maybe. I tried to focus on them, getting them back into the car, but my eyes kept going back to the rearview mirror. That's when I saw him open his glove compartment. He leaned over and reached in slowly. I couldn't see what he took out, but I saw the motion. His hand disappearing, then coming back up with something small and dark. My stomach dropped. I don't know what made me react so fast. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was fear. I yelled for everyone to get in the car, slammed the locks down as soon as the doors shut, and floored it. The tires squealed as we took off. Gravel sprayed behind us. I didn't even look back for a few seconds because my hands were shaking on the wheel. When I did, the truck's headlights were still there, bouncing slightly as he hit the same bumps in the road. He was following again, closer this time. I didn't know what to do. The roads all looked the same in the dark. I took random turns, cutting through neighborhoods, through intersections where no one else was around. I remember one long stretch of road lined with trees where the branches hung low, casting shadows that flickered across the windshield like hands reaching. I could see my friends in the mirror, holding onto the seats, faces white, mouths open but silent. Then, for a few seconds, I thought we'd lost him. I turned down a steep driveway that led behind some houses, killed the headlights, and waited. The car filled with the sound of heavy breathing and the ticking of the cooling engine. No one spoke. We sat like that for 10, maybe 15 minutes, not moving. I kept checking the mirror, but all I saw was darkness. Finally, I told them we'd head back to the main road, go toward the gas station near the highway. It was lit up all night. I figured if we got there, we could find help. I backed out slowly, turned the headlights on, and started down the street again. The moment we turned onto the main road, my heart stopped. The pickup truck was there, parked on the shoulder, facing the direction we were coming from. Its headlights switched on the second we appeared. It was like he'd been waiting. I slammed the accelerator down. The car jerked forward and everyone in the back screamed. I don't remember breathing. The road curved downhill toward town, and I took it as fast as I could without losing control. The truck followed, headlights bouncing, engine roaring. Every turn I made, he stayed with me. Every intersection I passed, he stayed right behind. We hit the long stretch at the bottom of the hill, the one that led straight into town. I could see lights ahead, red and blue flashing in the distance. For a split second, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks. But then I saw them clearly. Police cars, fire trucks, an ambulance. There had been an accident at the intersection ahead. I slowed down, thinking maybe this was it. Maybe I could finally stop. I started to drift toward the shoulder near the police. The truck suddenly accelerated, swung out into the opposite lane, and flew past us. He blew right through the red light, right past the wreckage and the cops without even slowing down. One of the officers waved his flashlight at him, probably yelling something, but the truck didn't stop. It disappeared over the next hill like it had never been there. I pulled over near the accident. The cops were busy dealing with the crash, but one of them came over to tell us to move along. He must have seen the look on my face because he asked if we were okay. I nodded, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking on the wheel. After a minute, I drove us home. The whole ride back, no one said a word. The car smelled like vomit and fear. The windows fogged again, the air thick and silent. When I finally parked in front of my house, everyone just got out and left without speaking. We didn't even say goodbye. I sat there for a long time, watching my breath cloud up the glass, trying to calm down enough to get out. Every sound outside made me jump. The creak of the mailbox, the wind in the trees, the distant hum of another car somewhere far away. The next morning, I drove by the same hill on my way to school. There was no sign of the pickup, nothing unusual. Just the same quiet roads, the same empty park where the whole thing started. I told myself it was just some crazy guy messing with us. Maybe drunk, maybe high, but part of me knew it wasn't that simple. The way he followed us, the way he waited, it wasn't random. He knew what he was doing. He wanted to scare us or worse. Sometimes, even now, when I'm driving late at night and see headlights in the mirror that don't change distance for too long, I get that same feeling again. The tightening in my chest, the cold sweat on my hands. It's been years, but I still check the mirror more than I should. I never saw that truck again. None of us ever talked about it after that night. But every time October rolls around and the air starts to smell like smoke and wet leaves again, I remember that night in the hills, the way the headlights filled the car, and the silent figure sitting behind the wheel of that pickup truck, watching us like he was waiting for something that never came. When I was about 13, my parents invited our old neighbors over for dinner one weekend. It had been years since we'd seen them. They used to live in the same block of flats as us back when I was little, maybe until I was 5. I barely remembered anything from that place, just flashes of images. A long hallway with a carpet that smelled of dust, the balcony railing with the chipped paint, the sound of someone's TV from next door always playing too loud. It was one of those buildings where every sound echoed and blended together, and as a kid, I never thought much of it. That night, I was sent to bed early, around 9 or so. I wasn't tired, and I could still hear the hum of voices from downstairs. The old walls of our house carried every sound, and their laughter and talking felt close enough that I could almost picture them sitting around the table. My dad had probably opened a bottle of wine, my mom fussing over whether everyone had eaten enough. I lay there listening to the rise and fall of their voices, half asleep but still catching bits and pieces of the conversation. Then one of the voices, the woman neighbor's, got clearer. She said something that pulled me right back to being awake. It was my name, or rather what they used to call me as a kid, Diggsy. I hadn't heard that name in years. Everyone used to call me that back in the flats. I heard her say something like, "Hey, do you remember when Diggsy used to complain that there was someone in his room?" I froze. I didn't remember ever saying anything like that. I just lay there completely still, listening as she went on, her voice getting softer, a bit uneasy. "Well," she said, "there's a new family that just moved into the flat above ours. They've got a little boy, about 3. He's been saying the same things Diggsy did." That part sent a shiver through me. I didn't move for a long time after that. My mind was racing, trying to piece together what she meant. What did I say? Who did I think was in my room? Why didn't I remember any of it? I didn't sleep properly that night. I just kept staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind outside, and waiting for my parents to come upstairs so I could pretend to be asleep. The next morning, over breakfast, I asked my mom what that woman had meant. She looked up from her tea and I could tell right away that she wasn't expecting me to ask. She gave me this long look before saying, "You don't remember?" I shook my head. She put her cup down, leaned back, and sighed like she was deciding how much to tell me. She told me that when we lived in those flats, weird things used to happen all the time. She said it started small. Footsteps down the hallway late at night when everyone was in bed. Things would go missing, like keys or spoons, and then turn up in strange places. My toys would be moved around the room when no one had touched them. Sometimes my mom said she'd hear me talking to someone in my room, even when she knew I was alone. I had no memory of that part, but I didn't interrupt her. She said the worst thing happened one afternoon when she was listening to a record. She told me she remembered the song, something by Fleetwood Mac, playing normally until it began to slow down. Not skip, not scratch, just flow. The way she described it made my skin crawl, like someone had put a finger gently on the turntable and was holding it there, dragging the song to a stop. She said she lost it at that point, started shouting at whoever or whatever it was to leave us alone. And the moment she finished yelling, the record went right back to playing normally. She said after that everything stopped. No more noises, no more missing things, nothing. It just ended. I didn't know what to say to that. It sounded crazy, but I could tell she believed every word. She wasn't the type to make up stories. My dad didn't say much about it, only that it was an old building and weird sounds happened all the time. But my mom's tone, the way she spoke, stayed with me. I could see that it had really happened, at least to her. For a few days after that, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I tried to remember anything from that time. The flat, my room, anything odd. I could remember the smell of damp carpet, the sound of the elevator, the way the windows rattled when buses went by outside. But I couldn't remember being scared. That bothered me the most. If something strange had been happening, wouldn't I have remembered? I started wondering if maybe I'd just blocked it out, because I was too young to make sense of it. A few years later, when I was about 16, we drove past those old flats on the way somewhere. They looked exactly the same. Long, gray, with tiny balconies and curtains drawn in half the windows. There were still kids playing outside, and laundry hanging from the railings. It felt smaller than I remembered, like everything from childhood does when you see it again. I asked my mom if she ever missed living there. She shook her head immediately. Not really, she said. I didn't like that place. She didn't explain why, and I didn't press it. Years went by, and I didn't think much more about it until one night when I was in my 20s, scrolling online, bored. I came across a local community post about that same block of flats. Someone asking if anyone had lived there, and if they remembered weird noises in the building. The comments were full of people saying the same things. Footsteps, things moving, strange power issues, cold spots. People joked about it being haunted, but a few comments stood out. One person said that electrical problems were constant, especially on the top floors. Another said their record player used to slow down randomly, even after replacing it. It was the exact same thing my mom had described. I stared at that comment for a long time, wondering if it was just a coincidence. It made me start thinking about how sound travels in those old buildings, how footsteps from one floor could sound like they're coming from your hallway, how vibration from plumbing or wiring could make things move slightly. The record player slowing down could have been a power fluctuation or faulty wiring. Rational explanations, right? But still, the way my mom told it, the timing of it all, how it stopped the moment she yelled, that part always stuck with me. I tried to find pictures of the inside of those flats online, just to see if anything would trigger a memory. I found some old listings, the same narrow rooms and faded wallpaper, the kind that looks yellow under the lights. I imagined my tiny bed in the corner, maybe a nightlight somewhere, and me, 5 years old, saying there was someone in my room. The thought of a 3-year-old years later saying the same thing was the part that bothered me most. Kids don't copy each other like that. They just say what they feel or see. Maybe the sounds in the building were that distinct. Maybe every kid who lived there heard the same creaks and footsteps, the same noises in the night. I never found out what happened to that family that moved in after us, whether their kid kept saying those things, or if it stopped the way it did for us. Sometimes I think about how those buildings are still there, still full of families, kids, noise, and the same old wiring. And maybe there's still someone else hearing those same strange sounds, footsteps in the hall, a creak where there shouldn't be one, the faint feeling that someone's standing just out of sight. When I look back on it now, I don't think about ghosts or anything supernatural. What creeps me out more is how memory works. How I could forget an entire part of my childhood, and then years later find out about it from someone else. How my mom's story matched what a stranger described online decades later. The fact that something unexplained happened, and it left a mark, even though I wasn't aware of it at the time. It's strange, but sometimes at night, when I'm half asleep and I hear the faint creak of floorboards or a low hum from the walls, I think of that old flat. I can almost picture it. The narrow hallway, the flickering light above the door, the thin carpet muffling the sound of someone walking slowly past. I tell myself it's just the building settling, or pipes or air shifting through the walls. but deep down it still gives me that same cold feeling. Not fear exactly, but the quiet unease of knowing that something happened once. Something real, and I'll never fully understand what it was. The house we rented was old, built sometime around 1904, maybe earlier. It sat on a quiet street just outside of town, surrounded by a few other older homes that had all been patched and remodeled through the decades. Ours still carried that untouched feeling, though, the kind of house that creaked under its own weight and smelled faintly of old wood and dust no matter how often you cleaned. The paint was chipping around the window frames, and the floors sloped in some spots like the whole place had sunk just a little too far into the ground. Over the years, the back of the house had this strange setup, a small vestibule between the outside and the actual house. You'd open one door to step into this little square space, maybe 4 feet wide, with one door leading to the basement and another leading into the dining room. The back door had a tall window running down the middle, covered by a long curtain that we pulled shut at night. The floor of that vestibule was old linoleum, cracked and yellowed, and when you stepped on it you could hear the wood underneath shift slightly. The door to the basement was heavy and solid, with an old latch that didn't always catch right unless you slammed it. When my ex and I moved in, I thought the place was perfect, quiet, old-fashioned, affordable. She didn't think so. She'd been struggling for a while, and this place seemed to make everything worse. Don't know if it was the isolation or the fact that the house felt constantly heavy, like the air never really moved. She'd have fits of yelling or crying out of nowhere, often late at night, echoing through the thin walls. One night it was worse than usual. I don't even remember what started it. Something small, probably. But she was screaming in the dining room, pacing, throwing her arms around. I just stood there trying to keep calm, when suddenly we both froze. A loud, sharp sound came from behind the curtain covering the back door. It was the sound of something slamming, over and over, slam, slam, slam. It was so violent and uneven that it didn't sound like wind or anything mechanical. It sounded like someone down there was just losing their mind, slamming a door again and again with no rhythm, no reason. The sound was coming from the basement door in the vestibule. I remember the way her face went pale when she realized it. We both dropped down onto the floor, crawling toward the curtain, our hearts racing. The curtain didn't quite reach the floor, and through the uncovered lower window pane we could see directly into the vestibule. The basement door was swinging wildly open and shut. Slam, slam, slam. The whole frame shook with each hit. It didn't move like it was caught in a draft. It moved violently, erratically, like someone was shoving it from the other side with both hands. There was no pattern to it. Sometimes it would slam hard twice in a row, then pause, then slam again. We were both completely still, just watching. Then came a sound that made every hair on my body stand up, a deep, heavy impact from below us. It wasn't the sound of the door anymore. It was like someone had taken a sledgehammer and hit the underside of the floor right beneath where we were sitting. It shook the entire dining room. The plates in the cabinet rattled. I could feel it in my chest. After that, everything stopped. The basement door stopped moving. The air went dead quiet. I stayed crouched there for a long time, just listening. My ex was whispering to herself, panicking, but I couldn't move for a moment. Eventually, I stood up, grabbed the flashlight we kept by the back door, and unlocked the vestibule door. The second I opened it, the basement door, which had been completely still, opened one last time on its own, slowly this time, and then just hung there. It didn't close again. I could see straight down the dark staircase. I stepped inside, heart pounding so hard it made me dizzy. The vestibule smelled like old wood and cold air. I reached out and pushed the basement door all the way open. It creaked on its hinges. There was nothing behind it, just the stairway leading down into darkness. I stood there for maybe half a minute, not breathing, trying to decide if I should even go down. The smart thing would have been to close the door, lock it, and go back to bed. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to see what was down there. I needed to know if someone had broken in, if there was something loose banging around. Something to explain the noise, so I went down. The stairs were steep and narrow, made from old wood that flexed under my weight. The flashlight beam bounced off the stone foundation walls and the dirt floor below. The air was cold and heavy, with that thick, earthy smell you only get in old basements that were never finished. The whole place looked exactly as it always did. Old paint cans, a rusted furnace, a few cobwebs hanging low in the corners. I checked everything. There was no one down there. Nothing moved. The basement door above me hung open, silent. I stood in the middle of that dirt floor for a while, just listening to the sound of my own breathing. My flashlight caught dust floating in the beam. That was all. No sound, no wind, no movement. Just silence. After a few minutes, I went back upstairs and locked both doors, the basement and the one leading into the dining room. My ex was sitting on the floor crying quietly, her hands shaking. I didn't know what to say. I didn't even know what to think. We both ended up staying awake for hours after that, just listening for more noises. Nothing else happened that night. A few weeks later, she left. Things between us had been falling apart for a long time, but that night seemed to break something in her. She said she couldn't stay in that house anymore, that she felt like the place was feeding off her, that it made her angrier and sadder every day. She moved out, and for a while I thought I might too. But I stayed. The strangest part is that after she left, the house felt different. It was still old, still drafty, but quieter somehow. Lighter. I stopped hearing strange noises at night. The floors didn't creak as much. The vestibule, which had always felt cold and tense, just felt like a normal little space again. I stayed there for another year and never experienced anything like that night again. Not once. I even tested that basement door during storms, during high winds, even once when a hurricane was passing through. The thing barely moved, was solid. I've thought about that night a lot since then, trying to find an explanation. Maybe the pressure changed just right to make the door move like that. Or maybe there was something loose in the foundation that caused the loud slam. Maybe. But I've lived in old houses all my life, and I've never seen a door behave like that before or since. Sometimes I think about the way the energy in that house shifted after she left. I don't know if I believe in anything supernatural, but I do believe that people can affect the spaces they live in. The kind of energy they carry, their anger, fear, sadness, it builds up. It seeps into the walls somehow. Maybe that's all it was. Maybe the house was just reflecting what was already there. I'll never really know for sure. But every now and then, when I think about that old basement, I can still hear the sound of that door slamming in my head, those uneven, violent hits echoing through the floorboards. And I still remember how the air felt right before it stopped, like the house itself was holding its breath.